The Society of the Spectacle is Debord's diagnosis of the titular spectacle. The illusion of functionality, a fantasia of global ideals which exists to perpetuate the pleasant, dreamy, sleepwalking consumption of the masses. Mark Fisher once described Debord's analysis of the 1960s and 1970s, for example, as being almost quaint now. In the 2010s, upon the arrival or transference of the human populace into cyberspace, the spectacle became ubiquitous. Prior to this, one had to turn on the television. Now it's all over social media, and therefore are most of the population's psychic priorities, whether they realise it or not. Theoretically, the spectacle would dissipate upon the new 2010s and 2020s media transparency. No one can imagine today, for instance, of Mao Zedong's personality cult spreading outside, or potentially even within, China during the internet or social media age. Xi Jinping may have been able to build himself up into a formidable media figure in the television age, but in the information age, not so. In the 1930s, Stalin and Hitler convinced the New York Times to name them People of the Year. Could Putin do so now? Actually, maybe we wouldn't put it past some of these amoral cosmopolitan media loons. The illusion of the world as a functioning international society of trade and markets, glamorous celebrities and professional politicians, that is the spectacle, or some of it. Does that still exist? Everyone knows now that the illusion of society working and functioning under any pretense or sense was just that, at a macro level. The spectacle exists on a micro-world level, exists on social media as these vampiric influencers or pseudo-influencers exist so that they might display their spectacle to others. Any enjoyment they have of their own spectacle, truthfully very little, is dependent on the responses, reactions, approval of others. They perpetuate this vile cycle. It's been the norm since like 2011 or so, and no one calls it out enough because this perceived quantification of social approval has frozen the society into submission, and then inspired some of the ugliest reactionary garbage the world has ever seen, but that's a totally separate issue even. There was no cyberdelic utopia to look forward to in the 21st century. To quote Ken Goffman, aka Are You Serious, of the very legendary Mondo 2000 magazine, what a beautiful, simpler time that appears to me to be. Quote begins, "Anybody who doesn't believe that we're trapped hasn't taken a good look around. We're trapped in a sort of mutating multinational corporate oligarchy that's not about to go away. We're trapped by the limitations of our species. We're trapped in time. At the same time, identity, politics, and ethics have long turned liquid. Cyberculture, a meme that I'm at least partly responsible for generating, incidentally, has emerged as a gleeful apologist for this kill-the-poor trajectory of the Republican Revolution. You find it all over Wired, the Rolling Stone of technology, this mix of chaos theory and biological modelling that is somehow interpreted as scientific proof of the need to devolve and decentralize the social welfare state while also deregulating and empowering the powerful, autocratic multinational corporations. You've basically got the breakdown of nation-states into global economies simultaneously with the atomization of individuals or their balkanization into disconnected subgroups, because digital technology conflates space while decentralizing communication and attention. The result is a clear playing field for a mutating corporate oligarchy, which is what we have. I mean, people think it's really liberating because the old industrial ruling class has been liquefied and it's possible for young players to amass extraordinary instant dynasties. But it's savage and inhuman. Maybe the white elite think that's hip, but then don't go around crying about crime in the streets or pretending to be concerned with ethics." I believe this quote is from 1997. Capital survived into the new spectacle, the digital social media spectacle. I was born into a world, the 2000s, where the old spectacle, television screens rather than, or now joined by, computer and or smartphone screens, was the dominant form. It was the spectacle inspired by George Lucas's Star Wars and what it did to our culture. That's the world I grew up in. Let me read some of Jonathan Rosenbaum's initial 1977 review of Star Wars, which I was reminded of by the seminal Barry Moore, and see if you cannot picture Debord writing this. "The Solitary Pleasures of Star Wars" is the title of the review. "A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away," reads the opening title, over vast interstellar reaches of widescreen space. "I've seen the future and it works," declares a happy teenager on his way out of the movie to a TV reporter in Los Angeles. oddly parroting what Lincoln Steffens said about Russia over 50 years ago, before Ford Motors gave the slogan a second lease on life. Rather than do some angry, socially relevant film, Lucas has said, I realised there was another relevance that is even more important. Dreams and fantasies, getting children to believe that there is more to life than garbage and killing and all that real stuff like stealing hubcaps, that you could still sit and dream about exotic lands and strange creatures. Although garbage and killing are anything but absent from Star Wars, and stealing hubcaps is around in spirit if not in letter, Lucas's aspiration is easy enough to comprehend, even after the social interests of his THX 1138 and American Graffiti. The disconcerting thing for a good many critics about his latest box office monolith is that it doesn't seem to mean anything other than what it unabashedly is, a well-crafted, dehumanized update of Flash Gordon with better production values, no ironic overtones, and a battery of special effects. Following the fashion set by 2001 in some aspects of its design, robots programmed to be more personable than any of the actors, in-depth trajectories of slab-like missiles entering the lower foreground of shots and sliding away diagonally, including the 3 long paragraphs preceding the action, Star Wars postulates itself as the anti-2001 in nearly every other respect, not only because fantasy is systematically substituted for technology. If Kubrick's central subject was intelligence, Lucas's is predicated on blind instinct. Luke's initiation into the Force, like the spectators into the film, is basically a matter of surrendering to conditioned reflexes and letting the cosmic mise-en-scene take over. And where 2001's sense of spectacle was contemplative, Star Wars is near Pavlovian in its careful measurements of give and take, making it impossible on a practical level to isolate many of the special effects from the editing. What has any of this to do with esoteric items like numero dos and ci et alleurs, whose more fragile transactions might as well be occurring on another planet? Simply the fact that both are concerned with advancing knowledge in the here and now, and this is generally taken to be such a distasteful activity that even defenders of such films generally feel compelled to describe their experiences as ones of necessary unpleasure. The mere title of an earlier Godard film, La Guerre Savoir, already sounds anachronistic within the present climate. Who but a sick person, runs the implied argument, could take pleasure in a documentary shot of Palestinian soldiers in Ici et Allures, followed by a title saying that nearly all these actors are dead? Better to take a calculated step backward in knowledge, sever communal and historical ties, hoot at heroes and villains alike, blow up invisible imaginary enemies from a safe video distance, and enjoy it all as clean, healthy fun, marking time until the next real opportunities for automatic xenophobic destruction arrive. This is the relevance of Star Wars that Lucas finds more important, and several million filmgoers are heartily agreeing. In a comment replying to Barry Moore on my video discussing, very glowingly mind you, George Lucas's Star Wars, I write in regard to both Rosenbaum's piece and Guy Debord this. Rosenbaum's initial review of Star Wars reads not just as a critique of an individual film, but a diagnosis of cultural stagnation at the insistence of spectacular fantasies and mass media events, not unlike the analysis of the sharp Guy Debord. Now it describes the normalized state of affairs in the English-speaking world, the elevation of fantasy as motivational bliss to ignore the perils of others, because one ought to enjoy their lucky fortune instead, be grateful for their luxurious lot in 21st century suburban life. This is the world I was raised in. Rosenbaum describes a way of thinking which is more or less encouraged of children from my own age bracket. Those who were in need were seen on television spots. We would donate gold coins to do our part, to ease our consciences. Whatever are we to do? Now the climate, our planet itself, emerges as the existential threat, all because of greed and money/power-hungry sociopaths. No one is surprised, although nevertheless it is phenomenally disappointing. And the World Cup, well, I suppose that's part of the spectacle too. A few show trials, some footage of athlete protestations, but all in all, no one wants to boycott the World Cup over human rights abuses or slave labour. I'd recommend everyone watch this film in order to understand the systems of power and control which operated in the 20th century, the ancestor of today's. If you really want incentive and a superior, to my senses, spectacle than any overglorified sports contest, sports car commercial or beach house brochure, hey, try Debord's film. He has, for whatever reason, out of good taste or as to make a scathing point about capitalism and desire, included many photographs of naked, or at least topless, females, women whom there may have been some demand to be topless. My point is, there are multiple aspects of this work which I found extremely captivating, and I like to think many, many other people will too. Read up on Guy Debord, RIP. Also for a contemporary equivalent, though also RIP, the late, phenomenal and empowering Mark Fisher. It is not your fault. They ask you to believe in a chaotic, godless world, and yet they expect you to blame yourself, not any innumerable factors, at your misfortune. As someone who currently has 2 jobs, seeking to move back to just one because I want to look forward to existing, how entitled of me, I recommend those Australians my age or younger to seek out a good job rather than a job. If you desperately need a job, go seek out government assistance, at least if you're living in Australia, and don't feel bad about others accusing you of taking their tax money. They were just going to spend it on renovations to show off to their pseudo-friends anyway.
Let 'em all go to hell except Cave 76.